What's up, permaculture people? It is spring, it's April 1st, and it's just a little homestead update this side. This time on the other side of that giant oak tree over there. Everything else, I think, has been on the other side that I've made of this property we've got here. But this is some firewood for next year, all out of the woods. This pile is the most seasoned. This is probably a mix of about that amount seasoned plus some newer stuff. This stuff is mostly newer, greenish, maybe slightly aged green, all the way back here. And then there's some scrap wood from milling some ash and poplar, and those are the round ends of those boards, and we're probably going to use them to make hexagonal, like micro hugel-path beds, and then line them with rocks. Here's where I got stuck a little bit. So obviously that's where the water is coming. There's a lot of water coming down here. There's this sort of weird sunken flat spot. It's like the opposite of a plateau because it's low, but it's like kind of flat and low. It's not really a valley. I guess it's like a flat valley sort of. Anyways, it's where a bunch of apple trees got blasted out of the ground decades ago. And so now it's like this weird drainage tunnel trench that brings the water coming down this hill off the hill and away, and kind of drains it unnecessarily. And the point, what we're going to try to do with it is to capture the water as it comes down the hill and make it serpentine back and forth using some keyline methods, ponds connected by swales kind of going back and forth across the slope and hydrating the ridges, and taken from high valleys in the slope and drawn it out. So yeah, all this pond stuff is going to be managed from the top down. Where that house is way up there, down in front of that is where our property is, and there's that whole hill is wet, so that's where the water's really coming from. It's making its way down here. So we're going to start up there and start to draw the water across the slope back and forth all the way down on both sides too. That side just doesn't get as much of an influx of water. There's like a spring over there. But this is a compost amendment pile that sort of sits at the edge of this pond. So it's either leaching stuff out of it, or it's just keeping it moist and active and keeping it from drying out. I'm not really sure. Probably a little bit of both. But you can see how the water comes down and ripped through my biochar pile, so that's definitely kind of drained some stuff. But luckily I've got more swales, more hugel-pathed swales just downstream, so they're absorbing whatever stuff is leaching, or at least some of it. What I recently did was bordered this swale that looks so much more small now because it's surrounded by 5 or 6 inches of woody biomass, cardboard, wood chips, some sort of old King Stropharia spawn that's getting its last chance at life, and then more wood chips. And the idea is this swale is going to be made into like a mini raised bed essentially, because it's surrounded by all this mulch. It's going to get its own organic matter layers too, so it'll get it built up some more itself, but it's going to be broad forked and loosened because there's a lot of inverted sod in there that's still not broken down, because this is new as of last year. So we're going to break up the sod in there with a broad fork and aerate and get the major weeds out and give it some compost and rake it in, hoe it in, and shape it once again to be concave, so bowl-like. So it'll hold water on the top of it, so it's flat with scooped sides, essentially. Sort of like this, what I was describing here, this low plateau, a flat spot that's low. So the middle of the bed will be sunken from the edges to hold water in it. Same deal here. We're going to repurpose these tomato poles and maybe string them together and put some welded wire across them to make a fence upon which to grow peas. We grew a lot of peas last year and saved a good bunch of them, and we really like having peas in the freezer and eating them fresh, so that's probably what's going to happen there. And then at the far end of that bed there's 3 blueberries. Right here is this is a brand, well, not new, it's been in process for a while, but a newly continued on a hugel-culture bed. It's sort of a lasagna hugel because it wasn't dug in. It's just a bunch of brush, leftover brush that couldn't be chipped from various older projects, waste wood of many varieties, just put on the ground, not dug in, and then layered with sod from a old hugel-culture desodding renovation project across the street. I brought, I don't know, 20 wheelbarrows of sod over here and plopped them upside down to add that nitrogen and soil content to the woody core. And then on top of that, what I just did today was put all this old sticker-filled, nasty, rotting cardboard down that's been sitting in a pile over there for 2 years since we moved back. Everything we packed in boxes we didn't reuse. So that's on there on top of the inverted sod. And then after that, I raked up all the extra leaves that I'd been blowing off the driveway into our kind of wood chip pile area over there in front of the red truck. It's wood chip and leaf and brush, and like all the woody material is going to get processed. It's kind of where it starts. And yeah, and then after the leaves, I put on this layer of weeds and grass and stuff that came from right beyond this giant rock pile. There's a slope where the barn was rebuilt, and there's flags out there you can see. If I stop moving, maybe. Those flags represent terraces, more or less on contour. They kind of look like they're going uphill from this angle, but contour is always kind of deceiving, and I could have measured poorly, but don't think so. Anyways, those rocks are all going on where those flags are to make some big old stone terraces to walk on level paths across that slope. But yeah, all the weeds that comprise this mulch of this hugel came from that slope when we cleared it to mark those contour lines. And from a bed way down yonder there beyond that fence, there's a berm of like fill soil that isn't good to grow on. That got full of weeds too, and we sort of transplanted some big lilacs that were part of excavations here that we're trying to rescue, and they survived. And we grew other things, sunflowers and other stuff that's not edible. Save them for seeds though and plant them again. So yeah, all those weeds and weeds from that slope, which is also full of fill and could be contaminated around the house that had lead paint for decades. All that being said, all that stuff, all those weeds, all that bioaccumulated biomass came over here and is now the mulch. So this bed is going to be for not edible plants. It's going to be for propagating flowers and habitat plants and just other useful plants, nitrogen fixers, things that you aren't going to eat because it's got nasty stuff in it. But it's going to be a good nursery bed. Basically just taking a bunch of debris from other projects and trying to find something useful to do with it in this cool spot kind of between these contour beds. Here's another hugel swale that has yet to get the mushroom treatment, but it's going to tomorrow or the day after. Yeah, so that's this hugel nursery for adopted, formerly orphaned plants and plants that need to be, fostered and then moved on later. So I'll show you what's going on down here. This is a little pond, all the rocks that came out of it. Hand digging this pond that's, it's kind of drizzling out right now and it's filling with some water, but when it rains for real, it certainly fills in and overflows. Doesn't hold water much yet because I haven't dug down very deep. I'm looking for clay. Eventually it might just be ledge. But we won't know until we try, and if it ends up being a big hole, I'll just turn it into a rain garden and hugel this too. Maybe put, you could even turn it into a weird little rain garden patio thing, like put a seat there. I don't know. Could be anything. But right now, it's the drain, it's the reservoir for the drain for the greenhouse, which we got a caterpillar tunnel. And there's a greenhouse in it. But what's going on in here is I dug a path down the middle in this very wet field that the greenhouse sits at the bottom of. So water is in, like I said, came from this wet hill. And it's saturated, right down the middle here. So I built this bridge of old cardboard boxes and wood chips, so you could walk through what would otherwise be a swampy canal. And then so I chucked the dirt to the sides and made these little raised beds. They're actually quite raised, but like I said, I built up again so they don't seem raised. Same way as the swales work. Serpentine, passively irrigated greenhouse beds. The water comes in off the roof of the greenhouse and in from the sides. It's starting to gather a little bit. You can see here. I'm gonna tweak all these paths too, and the edge and the way the plastic interacts. It's an imperfect thing right now, but when it rains for real, these are both flowing with water and passively irrigating these little river valley gardens. So this is sort of a microcosm of what I'm trying to do on the landscape in a way. Just serpentining swales, going back and forth slightly off contour, collecting them in wet spots, making little pools, and then they overflow and continue on their merry, gentle way down the slope. So in here I have overwintered kale. That little green thing isn't, but that purple thing is. That I let kale go to seed last fall. No, yeah, fall before last fall. And then then they went to seed this fall, and so I let their seeds grow under their own canopy, and then transplanted them here, and also picked seeds that were still hanging on the plant and broadcast them here. And they mostly died over the cold winter, during which these were barely closed. They were cinched together with rocks, but like the wind could still get in here easily. But these little kale seedlings did survive, so that was cool to see. So I broadcast more kale in here, and we're primarily going to use this greenhouse to grow sweet potatoes, because it'll mimic the climate of roughly, I don't know, down south. We grew sweet potatoes in Asheville, so that was really fun. So it inspired us to grow them here because they were so good and easy to store, and like gave good greens and low maintenance, and like create a ground cover. And they're more delicious and nutritious, I guess, than regular potatoes. So for all those reasons, that's primarily why we have this greenhouse, to grow those sweet potatoes and maybe ginger and other zone bending crops, as well as to grow into the winter and earlier in the spring, and grow plants, all the things you regularly do with a greenhouse, plus the sweet potatoes and stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna make tables out of repurposed pallets that have been wood boxes, firewood boxes. Cut them all up, cut the 1x material off the 2x4 material, and the 1x material becomes seedling boxes in which to put soil blocks to grow the seedlings from the seeds we save, ideally. And yeah, and some of those seeds were tried in this little greenhouse, and they have yet to germinate. They might not, they were frozen tomatoes, so I thought maybe they would survive. They would be, they would germinate because they survive outside when it's freezing, and volunteer tomatoes. So either it still just hasn't happened, or they somehow don't work for some reason. Frozen for too long, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, there's saved pepper and tomatoes not coming up, but there are broccolis coming up that we bought. Some old saved peppers. They look, not as happy. Some more broccoli. This cabbage, different types of white cabbage, doing okay. And then a bunch of onions, new onions. I have old ones too, home saved ones. Gonna try those as well. So we want to fill this thing with stuff while it's cold, while it's still able to get freezing at night, which it is. Well, this stuff doesn't care. Well, the peppers might, but we're just pushing the edge, seeing what happens. And that's the deal. So that's early spring permaculture homestead stuff going on here at the Dirt Goat Ground Zero Fort Station headquarters. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's a little more stuff over here. This is another compost area. This big old weird looking pile is all the sod that came out of plowing this spot to put the greenhouse in here. So we plowed all the grass so we don't have a greenhouse full of grass, and to try to level it out a little bit. And as a consequence, though, it's lower than the field, and the field's already wet, so it gathers the water, and then when the plastic is up or right or not obstructing it, the water can get in there and go in those zigzag beds. This would be a good time to tweak it because I can see what's going on, but gotta go eat dinner in a minute. But yeah, that's how this is all gonna work. And we'll build some ends eventually, frame in a wall, and then put the plastic back on it and put a door in. But this is that wet field. This is all the sod in a big pile. It came from there, and then covered in cardboard and leaves and wood fiber to kill it, so it becomes just dirt compost, basically topsoil compost. This is like the back side of the compost bins where wood and other stuff, wood fiber. Basically a carbon bank on the back side of all these bins, so you can throw your nitrogen in and then chuck whatever carbon you can find back there on it. Here's some old cow manure that's I'm letting it age on its own some, and as you can see, I gouged some out and mixed it in to this compost pile, which is done. That was done in the fall. This is the active compost pile, and then this is just the beginning of a compost pile made simply to keep the field from eating up all the sheet mulch I put down as a base for all this. It was starting to, you know, the field was working its way in, so I had to sheet mulch it with the beginning of a compost. And eventually, you know, soon I'm going to flip all this onto that and combine these two so that there's an empty bin to flip that one. Then I have this. This is where I was storing all the contaminated, possibly weeds, which I'm using as mulch for the hugel bed. I was storing it right here, so now this is open. So having a many bin thing with two sides is really handy for having lots of possibilities. A lot of fertility being generated at different stages and, you know, consistencies and whatnot. This is still leftover brush land. This used to be where brush was burned, but we decided to stop burning it and chip it. And there's still just a bunch of little sticky stuff still left in here. We got to rake out and incorporate into some new hugel culture bed, a regular one that's gonna be dug in unless the ground is super close. The ledge is super close to the top, we'll see. But that's gonna go right along this little ridge, and then below it will be a hugel swale. Yeah, I think, yeah, a regular hugel and a hugel swale, leaving enough room along the greenhouse to drive along the side. So 2 more beds essentially parallel to that. And yeah, this compost pile here is further along. This stuff is mostly sod from across the way too. This is like sod and wood chips or sod and leaves, so it's kind of going to be a soily compost mix. So I think it might be good like nursery stuff. One, you know, I'm going to flip it again, and then probably next flip after that it'll be ready. So it's taking a long time. It's like a 1.5 years old already. So it might be 2-year compost because it went in with such huge chunks of sod, you know, clay, but it got mixed with the biomatter, the leaves and wood chips, so that'll help break it down. We've been adding, you know, ash and biochar and manure, so we're slowly turning those chunks of clay sod into compost with some organic matter and food scraps as well, and weeds. You know, it's not a carbon pile full of sod. There's nitrogen in there too. With some old manure here, and that biochar I showed you flowing away, and some old leaves. This is probably going to be a pond area. I mean, it's like going to collect here. It's low. We're trying to just take what holes are happening and turn them into ponds, and then connect them with swales, because there's lots of holes all over this property and all over many properties. And I think it's a sensible way to go about laying out beds, paths, and reservoirs. Yeah, that's what I'm doing around here. Happy spring. Keep on keeping on and keep rocking in the free world and all that good stuff.